More information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
This is what unions do when people are in need, when our sisters and brothers are in need. We mobilize at the last second and make sure we're where we're needed. And we also maintain good relationships with management that we can utilize all of that for the greater good.
Association of Flight Attendants CWA spokesperson Taylor Garland speaking from San Juan, Puerto Rico about unions and United Airlines coming together for Puerto Rico. More than 300 union first responders, doctors, nurses, electricians, operating engineers, plumbers, iron workers, and utility workers flew into San Juan Wednesday to help with hurricane recovery. Puerto Rico residents evacuating due to the hurricane damage were on the return humanitarian flight. Garland says United Airlines CEO Oscar Munoz stepped up to join the unions in this humanitarian relief effort.
The flight attendants, pilots, and the machinists reached out to Oscar Munoz, CEO, and he answered the call and said, you know, we're going to make this happen. And so we were in constant communication for a little less than last week, and we were able to get the flight off the ground.
October 5th is World Teachers Day. On a world level, unionized teachers are represented by Education International, which has 32 million members in 170 countries. EI's David Edwards tells Canada's Radio Labour that professional teachers in public education are under attack by a global market-driven reform movement. EI calls it the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM. He says here's what GERM is focused on.
Market-based reforms, market-oriented reforms, has privatization. It heavily uses standardized tests as sort of the benchmark for what is quality, and it deprofessionalizes. It tends to, like I said before, it tends to play down the role of the teacher and tries to sort of script out and dictate what teachers should do.
Union teachers are often in the crosshairs of so-called reform movements with their professional status, salaries, benefits, and role in education all under pressure. And Edwards says conditions for teachers are deteriorating around the world as a result of this movement.
We've been seeing tendencies around flexibilization and casualization. We've been seeing continued pressure in terms of the outsourcing of teachers' work. So I would have to say it's probably been deteriorating over the past year in many places. For the most part, the global education reform movement, which tends to see teachers as just mere content deliverers, is still going forward.
WIN is America's multimedia voice for workers. Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Couple of days away, unexpected, and again, it's mind-blowing to me, and And I know I had a number of listeners going, hey, you go away for a couple of days and the world goes insane. Look, the shooting, horrible, horrible tragedy. And the fact that you've got gun nuts who, again, plant the head solely in the ground without having any willingness to discuss how do we make sure that somebody doesn't get an automatic weapon. Just seems to me to be at some point a conversation in this country we need to have. The gun thing, a bit much. And look, I'm not a gun grabber, but at some point you gotta say what is. And there was an interesting little tidbit running around that, in the wars, in all of the wars that I guess we've been in, there have been like 1.3 million people killed. And the number of people who have been killed with guns in the U.S. alone was like 1.5 million. And it made me sit back and go, I get when people die in war, but every day in this country there's a war going on. And we seem to be shooting ourselves. Or some crazy guy who just maybe didn't like country music. I don't know. And police don't know. It's crazy stuff. And what's even more twisted is what comes out of all of this is all of the conspiracy nuts and all of the nonsense, the noise. And maybe it's we have too much access to information. Maybe that's the problem. That you get these crackpots, or there's the grassy knoll. Just crazy. We're going to get to that. A lot of stuff going on. Just tons of stuff. But I want to start with, the State Department. Thank goodness we have a thorough and efficient staff at the State Department. Because they put out a statement yesterday. Now look, the big news yesterday was Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, reportedly called Donald Trump a moron. And look, I think the majority of us go, nothing wrong with that. Maybe Rex has got some good intuition skills. And maybe he's got some thoughts. Maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. But it was reported that he called him a moron and was ready to leave. And if you look at what's going on with foreign policy, if you're the Secretary of State looking at what Trump has done, calling him a moron is probably the lowest level of entry into attacking this administration. Even Bob Corker, who the senator from Tennessee who's going to retire, he said recently that, Mattis, Kelly, Tillerson, they're good people. They're good for national security. But they got a crazy person. There's chaos that undoes all of this. And he was pointing, at Trump. And you go, moron, the lowest level of entry into this discussion. Now, what's interesting is the State Department, their spokesperson, Heather Nauert, she said yesterday that, quote, the secretary does not use that type of language. The secretary did not use that type of language to speak about the president of the United States. He does not use that language to speak about anyone. And immediately I'm thinking Dr. Seuss, because that's kind of what that response. I will not eat green eggs and ham. I will not, Sam, I am. This is our State Department. This they had time for. Now understand, we've got real problems. There are people literally dying in Puerto Rico. And this is what our State Department's doing. Oh, Jeb Bush. Jeb came out of the crevice. The former governor of Florida, you may remember, and presidential candidate who got just thumped. He said, quote, every death is a horror, but if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina and you look at the tremendous, but he said, look, what we need is consistency and compassion. And he was pointing at the Donald, who evidently, when Donald was in Puerto Rico, said every death is a horror. But if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, a real catastrophe, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds of people that died, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody ever seen anything like this. And he rambles on, about, national embarrassment keeps coming to mind. But you've got Jeb saying, look, the people of Puerto Rico deserve consistency and compassion, which is not coming out of this administration. And I look at his trip, I look at the trip that Trump took to Puerto Rico, and it's mind-blowing. That, at one point he said, the job that's being done in Puerto Rico is nothing short of a miracle. The exact same thing he said, about Las Vegas. And I guess, my first thought was maybe we need to buy him a dictionary and look up the word miracle, because, I'm not getting how still not having power, still not having adequate bare necessities is a miracle. I'm not getting it. And the rest of the world is looking at us going, can't take care of your people? I mean, it's been reported that there's a German company that's going to be sending these renewable power battery sources so that you can get some power up and running really quickly. Because, look, this is the future of climate change. This is what we're going to be fighting all the time. And so you got this German companies going, look, we're going to step forward. You've got Canadian companies that want to send water treatment stuff. You've got all of these different countries and companies around the world going, hey, we'll help. And what does our president do? He's raging on Twitter, and he's playing golf. And the thing is in just the few short hours he was in Puerto Rico, he once again looked like the uncaring, self-centered narcissist that I think most of us already believe he is. But, it was front and center right there for us to see on display as he went there seeking adulation from the people who are suffering. I mean, the governor of Puerto Rico, he's Trump said, of the governor, he's not even from my party, and he started right away at the beginning appreciating what we did. Yes, because he's a smart guy. He knows that if he doesn't kiss your behind, if he doesn't give you the high praise, you're going to turn your back on him. Trump went on to say he was giving us the highest grades on behalf of his country, and I want to thank you. But here's the thing. If he doesn't give those high grades, if he doesn't kiss the ring, if he doesn't say, oh, Mr. Trump, you're the greatest. Oh, you're the tremendous. This is just the best thing ever. Thank you for the paper towels. Nothing's coming. And look, this governor knows without U.S. resources, they're screwed. Without aid dollars coming in, they're completely screwed. And what was interesting to me is, during the big trip, you had Trump who, and my wife had to call me and say, is this fake news? Have you seen this? And I go, yeah, I actually saw it come out of his mouth. He said, now I have to tell you, Puerto Rico, you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico. And when he looked around and nobody was chuckling with him, he said, well, that's fine. We're just fine. That's fine. That's fine. Fine. Again, this kind of, I want your approval. It's bizarre. I mean, it's really, really bizarre. And I go back to the quote, that he said a minute ago. If you look at that real catastrophe, that Katrina, which immediately I'm thinking, why in God's name is this guy bringing up Katrina when all of us are already thinking that this is his Katrina? And you go, or like somehow that this tornado, this hurricane, this catastrophe wasn't real. This is a fake catastrophe. This is fake disaster. And I'm gonna come in and fix it. And the fact that he asked the local official, what's your death count at this moment? It makes me go, what? At the time, it was 16 people. It is now up to, I believe, 36. And, you look at this moment, you look at the video footage of him there, it's mind-blowing that you've got this guy who's the leader of the free world coming in and saying, you should just be happy that it wasn't worse. You should be happy. At least you're not Katrina. At least Aren't more people dead? Give it time. Because the sad reality is you've got real structural problems. Now, Trump went on to say in his little trip that the power grid, honestly, was devastated before the hurricane even hit. It was crappy then. Look, you had horrible, horrible infrastructure. It was crummy. It was crappy back then. And the storm just made it worse. He said that most of the hospitals are open, or at least partially open. And by partially or open, according to the U.S. Naval Institute, they reported on Tuesday that 10 of the island's 69 hospitals were fully reconnected to the electrical grid. 10 out of 69. And again, remember what he said. Most of the hospitals are open. Again, back to that dictionary thing. Words have meaning generally important. Most in his world is 1 out of 7. That's most, right? Now, here's the thing. When you look at the reality is 10 of the 69 hospitals reconnected to an electric grid where FEMA has only been able to restore about 10% of the power on the island. About 10%, that's it. That means that 90% has none. So when Trump tells people that, you don't need any batteries. Flashlights, you don't need them anymore. You don't need those flashlights. You've got 10% of your island's got power. It just, again, it's mind-blowing. But here's the thing, and this is the really scary part. According to ABC News, they're reporting that FEMA thinks their goal is to get power to about a quarter of the island within a month. That means about 2.5 million citizens are going to have no power. Nothing. Done. I mean, it's really, really mind-blowing. Just absolutely mind-blowing. And the final thing, you had to throw out the little jab, which is, we don't have any truck drivers. All those lazy truck drivers. Now, understand what the right-wing conservative, fake news machine, the echo chamber, they were throwing out stories that, those Puerto Rican truck drivers, they went on strike just when the hurricane hit so they could hold the country hostage for higher wages, which isn't true. It's nowhere remotely close to true. But it's the fake news that they want to throw out. And you had Trump basically regurgitating that, saying, we need their truck drivers. Their drivers have to start driving trucks. We have to do that, he said. At the local level, they have to give us more help. They have to help their lazy selves. And you go, really? Did you really just say that? And the answer is yes. It's really quite amazing to me. You throw that to the fact that, about 7 to 10% of the electrical grid is back up. Trump went on to say that, the roads are clearing and communications are starting to come back up with 10%, with about 7 to 10% of the electrical grid back up working. And you would think, and I forget the senator who said it, I think it was Chris Murphy, who said, we spend $600 billion a year on a military that has all the resources that we could easily take over this island and get these people the things that they need. But we just don't have the leadership from Washington, D.C. to do that. It's sad stuff. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and also your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Disorder in the house. There's a flaw in the system. And the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. The floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken. And we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was a day known in Hollywood as Black Friday. After World War II, the movie industry began to rake in profits. But they did not pass those profits along to their employees. 10,000 members of the Conference of Studio Unions were on strike. They were part of the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners. They were also in a jurisdictional battle with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, over who should represent stage decorators. The strike wore on for half a year. The studios had more than 100 films backlogged and were able to wait out the strikers. But as the strike continued and the studios remained silent, pressure mounted. Despite the tensions between the two unions, thousands of IATSE members refused to cross the picket lines. On Black Friday, the strikers decided to concentrate their efforts at the Warner Brothers Studios gate. 300 picketers gathered to hold the line. Scabs, hired by Warner Brothers, tried to drive through the workers' picket lines to the studio. Variety accounted what happened next, writing, quote, "Strikers deployed from their barricades, halted non-strikers, and rolled 3 automobiles on their sides. By noon, reinforcements arrived from both sides. Firemen were called in to turn their hoses on the striking workers. Warner Brothers security deployed tear gas. Common for the time, accusations were hurled that the Conference of Studio Union strikers were communists. As a result of the strike, the Conference of Studio Union's employees were assigned to other jobs in the studios. When they refused, they were locked out. The union never recovered. The violence at the Warner Brothers Studios gate also helped to fuel the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act through Congress, which eroded union protections. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
He's going the distance. He's going for speed. She's all alone in a time of need. Because he's racing.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. As the president said, we need their truck drivers. Their drivers have to start driving trucks. So we have to do that at the local level. They have to give us more help because, look, he's playing into that fake news frame. That there are all these Puerto Rican drivers who are saying, you know what, it's a great time to hold the island hostage. A great time to enrich myself, to be greedy and lazy. That's the frame. Now, as we know, look, it's all BS. And it is the fake news frame. It is what we would hear on Fox or other conservative outlets. And the reality is look, there are actually Teamsters from the U.S. going to help because it is that dire of a situation. I'm here to talk a little bit about, both things, really, is Alex Moore. He's the communications director for Teamsters Joint Council 16. Alex, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me on the show.
So we hear this story. And help, maybe you've got better information than I do. This story that the hurricane hits and Teamster members, truck drivers go, you know what? Great time to make some extra money. We're going on strike. Any reality in that?
None at all. It was a totally concocted story from the same right-wing news websites that are behind a lot of the fake news. And I think it just is blaming working people for failures of others, trying to put the blame on the people who are really the victims. And we have been pushing back really hard. What's
scary is the president who claims fake news everywhere seems, in the quote that he made, seems to be the guy perpetrating the fake news.
Yeah, I mean, it was really troubling to hear that fake news repeated on such a prominent platform on Tuesday when it had been debunked by so many people on Monday, to the point actually yesterday, even Shepard Smith on Fox News, called it out as fake news and said it wasn't true.
Yeah.
I mean, that was very troubling.
So now on the other side of this, I understand yesterday the AFL-CIO, in conjunction with the Teamsters Union, sent a bunch of people to Puerto Rico to, one, drive trucks, but two, do a whole bunch of other things. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, since day one after the storm, there's a Teamsters local union in Puerto Rico, Teamsters Local 901. There's a Central Labor Council in Puerto Rico, and we have been in touch with them. The AFL-CIO has been in touch with them to understand exactly what they need. We've been sending supplies, and yesterday the first flight of AFL-CIO and Teamster union members flew from Newark Airport down to San Juan, Puerto Rico to put some boots on the ground and get ready to work. Over 300 union members, 79 of which were Teamsters, meeting up with an additional about 40 Teamsters who were already on the ground there. They're going to be driving relief supplies from the port. They're going to be clearing roads because that's a big problem. A lot of the roads are impassable right now. It's not just truck drivers going down there. We also send a lot of professional Teamster sanitation workers who are clearing debris, clearing roads, so that those trucks can get through, and all the people who have not been getting relief supplies can start getting them.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is this is the area is just completely devastated. It's almost worse than starting from scratch, because you have all of this debris, you have all of these situations that are just horrible.
It's true, and I mean, and it's an island territory that's been kind of neglected and ignored by the federal government for a long time. The Teamsters and other labor unions have been speaking up about the Puerto Rican debt issues and the need for the federal government to step in. The federal government, for years and years, has not stepped in, and the people of Puerto Rico are paying the price. From what we're told, the entire electrical grid is going to have to be rebuilt. And we're doing, all we can to support that. Part of this AFL-CIO trip was not just Teamsters, but lots and lots of nurses, building trades, skilled workers, whoever is the labor movement can provide. We're doing our best to provide it.
Yeah, because the need is desperate. Now, if anybody wanted to volunteer, if people wanted to go, is there a way to do that?
Yeah. So if you want to volunteer and go down with the Teamsters, you can visit Teamsters Joint Council 16's website. That is teamsters.nyc. And there's a form you can fill out, tell us what your skills are, give us your contact information. Already over 200 people have signed up on that site, and they're added to a list of potential volunteers. And as we confirm future flights, future trips that people can be part of, we'll be calling through that list and confirming who's available. It was pretty amazing. We put out the call over the weekend. On Monday, we started calling folks saying, can you leave Wednesday morning from Newark Airport? And there were a lot of people in New York who said, absolutely, I'll be on that plane in less than 48 hours. But there were people from California, people from the middle of the country who took that call and were there in Newark ready to fly out with us.
And look, this, in looking at the devastation on the island, this isn't going to be a once and done. I assume you're going to have to continue this effort, well into the future, because look, the photos that I see, the video that I see on the ground is just really just complete and total devastation of some areas.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a weeks, months, honestly years-long process to rebuild Puerto Rico. The labor movement will be there, and we'll continue to push for as much support as the island can get from the federal government.
There you go. Just lastly, I want to go back to the fake news story, because my email box was just slammed with people going, on one hand saying, "Is this true? Did you buy this?" And then the other saying, "See, we told you, those greedy people." Absolutely no validity in this story whatsoever.
Not at all. Our members were hit just as hard as everyone else, but day one after the hurricane, they were out there working. There were a lot of logistical problems in the way that prevented them from being able to get supplies everywhere they needed to go. You know, a lot of Puerto Rico is mountains, and when mountain roads get washed out, you can't drive a truck up them. That doesn't mean that the truck drivers are refusing to drive up those mountains. Our members were at work. They were moving things out of the ports, and more and more. And now they've been telling us what they need. We've been sending, more volunteers down to help them.
Good stuff. Alex, I appreciate the time. And as this continues, we'd love to have you guys back and keeping us up to date on what you're doing.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex Moore, Communications Director with Teamsters Joint Council 16 there in New York. And look, at the end of this, part of the whole effort is this is going to be ongoing. This is not a once and done. This isn't, we made a news cycle, it's over, it's going to go away. This is going to be around for quite some time. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
Begging anyone that can hear us to save us from dying.
Humanitarian crisis remains dire in Puerto Rico.
Scale up. They need to scale up in Puerto Rico. Katrina had 20,000 federal troops. And Puerto Rico is bigger than Katrina.
U.S. military begins to step up its disaster response. Trump attacks San Juan mayor on Twitter from his golf club in New Jersey. Plus, General Motors announces it will start making more electric cars.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics analysis, and snarky comment.
I have no reaction. The mayor's living on a cot, and I hope the president have a good day at golf.
That sounds like a reaction to me, General Honoré, man who saved New Orleans after Katrina. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, with the horrible events in Las Vegas, I'm concerned that Puerto Rico may fall off the radar of the corporate media right now. How are things going down there?
Well, they are improving somewhat in the wake of the destruction wrought by Hurricane Maria. The situation remains dire for hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens, with distribution of aid remaining the biggest problem for the island. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to give remarks in Puerto Rico later today. Journalists who have managed to reach the island's remote interior villages report that residents say they still have not seen any government relief operations, nearly 2 weeks after the hurricane destroyed the island's infrastructure and communications. The Department of Defense has now revised upwards the number of Puerto Ricans lacking access to clean water. It's about 54%, a little over 1.6 million people. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is now in Puerto Rico to begin restoring the electric grid transmission lines. On Friday, the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, gave another impassioned plea for the federal government to escalate its response and cut through bureaucratic red tape.
So I am done being polite. I am done being politically correct. I am mad as hell because my people's lives are at stake.
That received an unprecedented response from U.S. President Donald Trump. Tweeting from his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey over the weekend, Trump attacked the mayor and the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico as, quote, ingrates who, quote, expect everything to be done for them.
And just to be clear, Mayor Cruz has been spending the last 2 weeks wading through hip-deep water with waders on, trying to reach her constituent, trying to save lives with a bullhorn. You heard General Honore there, who was the general who came in after Katrina to clean up that mess, criticizing these obnoxious tweets from Donald Trump. I don't even know what to say at this point anymore.
Well, the U.S. military commander who has been appointed to lead this emergency response, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, is now in Puerto Rico. In an interview with CNBC, he agreed with Mayor Cruz's dire assessment after seeing the destruction for himself, saying he will need more troops and more equipment.
Do you think that we've turned a corner now on logistics?
On Monday, American car maker General Motors became the latest auto manufacturer to announce that it is making a push into electric cars, with at least 20 all-electric models by 2023. Auto industry analysts say the move was forced in part by China, which recently announced it will set a timetable for the complete phase-out of the sale of conventional gasoline and diesel cars within its borders. China intends to be the world leader in electric vehicle sales and manufacturing, and GM needs to keep up.
Well, it takes a while, but American auto companies are maybe figuring it out. You figured it out, Desi Doyen, long ago. Thank you for that. For much more on all our stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, I look at it, and what is it? It must be like Air White House. Evidently, the White House and the federal government running, an exclusive, lavish travel service. I mean, it was Mnuchin doing the sightseeing, and of course, the request for the military plane to go on his honeymoon. You had, Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price recently resign over his $1 million lavish travel needs. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke had to get to Las Vegas to give that really, really important speech in Las Vegas on the conservation of ice in the desert to a bunch of professional hockey league people. You have Environmental Protection Agency Chief Scott Pruitt, who evidently has gone back and forth to Oklahoma upwards of a dozen times. And let's not forget his $25,000 super phone booth. Secret stuff going on there. And, of course, the fact that he's the only EPA head in history to have around-the-clock security. Paranoid much? All of that isn't bad enough. You now have Veterans Affairs Chief David Shulkin. Now, Shulkin was brought in because we're going to clean up. We're going to clean up that mess. We're going to make sure that we, get veterans what they need, when they need it. We're going to cut down on the wait times. We're going to do all that stuff. We're going to get to work and refix. We're going to fix the system. That's what he was brought in to do. And yet I still hear all of the complaints coming out of, certain parts of the VA that are valid, because I would argue we don't have the resources. So the messaging that comes out of this is one of those things that's really frustrating, because you've got Shulkin, who evidently decided that it was time to, little trip. Going to cruise the Thames River. Going to do some sightseeing at Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey. Maybe take in a little tennis. Watch a little Wimbledon. And it wasn't that it was bad enough that he went he didn't go by himself on this 10-day trip. This little jaunt. He brought his wife. A little companionship. Look, and no one's against, hey, bring the wife. I'm okay with that. Bring the wife. He brought his chief of staff. He brought the Department of Veterans Affairs Undersecretary and her husband, an aide, and, of course, 6 security people. And yes, there was work. And according to the Washington Post, who obtained their itinerary, it was about half work, half pleasure. We, the taxpayers, paid for Shulkin's wife to fly there, to get there. All of them. We paid for everybody. But also provided her, because she has nothing to do with any of this, provided her a per diem for her meals. So we're paying for all of this stuff because evidently, according to the Washington Post, her travel was on an approved invitational orders. Now look, what's frustrating to me is these are the people who have told us that government's broken, government's corrupt, and we're going to fix it. And I go, hold on. At every turn, what it appears to me from the outside, and look, I'm just looking at this as a taxpayer, as an observer, as someone who goes, okay, you made a lot of claims during the campaign, cleaning stuff up. We're going to honor the taxpayer's dollar. We're the party of fiscal responsibility. We're the people who, when we grab a quarter, the eagle screams. I look at all of this lavish travel and you go, wait a second, how is it? Explain this to me. Is it that they think the taxpayers' coffers, did they think that's a giant piggy bank to fund their latest jaunts across the globe? And the sad reality is yes. And I keep coming back to when you put these entitled people into these positions, people who understand corporate America has lavished upon them things that most average working people cannot even imagine, can't even fathom. And I talked to a state representative a number of years back who had been a member of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And he was telling about the first time he went to one of the retreats. Because understand what ALEC does and what all of these corporate entities do. ALEC is not alone in this. Is they take these legislators, especially the state legislators, who don't make a whole lot of money. They make a good living, but not living in Mnuchin's world or Shulkin's world, not up there. They make a reasonable living. They make a good working class, good upper middle class living. He said you go to these places and the obscene opulence just grabs you. Whatever you want, it's there. And it got me to thinking about, when I'm looking at all of these travel, these people don't think they've done anything wrong. Because they're so entitled and so used to getting whatever it is that they want whenever they want it. And it got me to thinking that's the mentality. That's what they think. That's what they think government should be for them. And it's just obscene. And in the next hour, I want to talk a little bit about President Trump. Look, at the end of the day, this guy's costing the taxpayers an amazing sum of money. In fact, just in the money that we spend on his travel alone, we could put a huge dent in the need that's there in Puerto Rico. It's just mind-blowing. Just absolutely mind-blowing. Love to hear what you've got to say. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Quick break, right back with Victoria Jones, Talk Media News.
Be a lousy scab, or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That was the day Henry George accepted the nomination to run for mayor of New York on the United Labor Party ticket. In cities across the country, trade unionists met to found state labor parties and to hammer out political platforms for local and state elections. In New York City, ULP advocates issued the Clarendon Hall platform and nominated Henry George as the ULP candidate for the mayoral race. George had gained prominence with the 1879 publishing of his book, Progress and Poverty. In it, he addressed private land ownership as the basis for inequality and advocated for a single tax system. At New York's Cooper Union that evening, where thousands of supporters gathered, George addressed the crowd. He presented the ULP platform of higher wages, shorter hours, better working conditions, government ownership of railroads and communications, and the end to police repression. Burroughs and Wallace described the scene that night in their book, Gotham, A History of New York City, to 1898. During his speech, George declared, quote, "This government of New York City, our whole political system is rotten to the core." He argued that politicians had made a trade out of assembling votes and selling them to powerful interests. What business got in return was police protection, lax enforcement of housing and health codes, friendly judges, and fat franchises. To purify the political order, working-class voters had to sever ties to all the established parties and choose from their own ranks. For a party that had just been founded weeks before, George came in second. But like its sister organization in Chicago, the New York ULP would split over issues of socialism within a year. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor...
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
TheRickSmithShow.com. Lots going on, lots to get to, lots to talk about. That's why we've got Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you very much.
False flag. False flag.
False flag. I'm looking. This is fascinating that we're going. That I'm just clicking on the story in the Observer, and I'm talking about actually the Observer. The New York Observer, written by John Schindler, who I follow on Twitter, and I advise you to follow on Twitter.
I actually do, yes.
You do? You follow 20 Committee?
Yes.
I love him. And he has cats. But
we've all got our crosses.
Well, he's just adopted a second one, actually. So anyway, the point is that I had my first conversation this morning with a talk show host, one of my many talk show hosts, very early this morning, who started talking conspiracies, and I'd been up for like 3.5 hours, but I suddenly found myself extremely alert, going, "Oh boy, here we go."
Okay, hit me with it.
It's being kept. Don't you find it odd, he said, that nothing has come out about this guy? I said, well, I said, what do you mean? Tell me more. Nothing has come out about him. I mean, everybody has a Facebook, everybody, and I'm thinking, well, not everybody has a Facebook profile, actually, but then he goes on, suppose it's being suppressed. And I said, why would it be suppressed? And so we went back and forth. We went round and round the houses and in and out of the rose beds. And finally he said, don't you think if he was a pro-Trump this and this? And I thought, here we go. it's because he's a secret leftist that is being suppressed.
Is he really?
Well, that was the logical conclusion, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, and right after it happened, I actually tweeted out.
Why would Trump be part of that?
Look, if there's a conspiracy, Trump is the last person you let in on it, because immediately he's going to blurt it out.
Because he can't help himself.
No, I mean, honestly, there's no filter between those ears. Whatever goes in his ear comes out his mouth.
True.
He's the last guy. He would be, my grandmother would have been fun at that game too. But this guy would be great to have in that. You tell a secret to the person next to you, and it comes back around the room. He would be great to have in that as well.
Party and say something about like chupacabras or whatever those things are called.
Yeah, or anything. I mean, because it's just
jackalopes.
There you go. So, but I had tweeted out right immediately after the thing happened. I'm going, okay, where's Alex Jones and the crazy people going that this is a false flag, that that this is conspiracy by the left, that
I've got it.
And here it is.
I'm reading it now. Jones offered a tale that was convoluted even for him. Paddock was merely a front for the deep state in Washington, ISIS, and, quote, the literal grandchildren of the folks that financed the Bolshevik Revolution out of New York and London. Translation Jew.
All right, there you go. So we now have it. It's uncovered. Why can't we just
Alex Jones we're talking about?
Why can't we just have? Why can't we just say, the guy was crazy and we've got problems with guns?
So they are saying. So Jones is not saying that he didn't do it. He's saying that he was a front. Now, I actually had another host say to me this morning, this is another one. Then I went, come on, man. And he said, how do we know? This was his premise.
Grassy knoll.
Yes, he was dead in the room, but how do we know that he did it? He was dead in the room.
Okay, how do we know? You're right. How do we know? You're right.
This is an American phenomenon, as crazy as mass shootings, but not as deadly.
Oh no, I would argue it's just as deadly. You're polluting people's.
Like that.
No, you're polluting people's minds, and look, at the end of the day, we're giving justification for insanity.
You heard what our president tweeted this morning, didn't you?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm almost done with his Twitter account.
No, you can't keep away.
That's true.
It's true.
Sadly, it is true. I mean, the sad thing is I've almost normalized insanity. I've almost gotten to the point to where today wasn't as horrible as it could have been. That's kind of my mindset every day.
This is what. So now, are we going to tell them what he tweeted this morning?
Well, which one? Was it the stock market? Was it the Senate Intel Committee and looking into fake news? Where are we going?
Yes. Now, the reason he tweeted about that, apart from the general thing, was that yesterday the Senate Intelligence Committee held a fairly rare joint press briefing, bipartisan, because this is one of the very rare committees that really works as a bipartisan committee. Burr, the Republican chair, the vice, they actually call him, they don't call him a ranking member, they call him a vice chair, Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia, they work together. They're investigators. I would not like to be investigated by an investigator for the Senate Intelligence Committee. These are highly intelligent, professional, smart pros who really know how to investigate, get to the facts, and do the job. And this is a good committee. These are intelligent people, thoughtful people. I know I'm talking about Congress. Intelligent, thoughtful people who know their subject and have genuine interest in it.
Yep.
So, I mean, I know it sounds like an oxymoron. I'm talking about Congress, but there are people like that. Anyway, so they gave a briefing about an update on the Russia investigation, on Russian meddling and possible collusion with the Trump campaign. So today, this morning at 6:59, Trump tweets the following. Why isn't the Senate Intel Committee looking into the fake news networks in our capitalized country to see why so much of our news is just made up fake? That's like scary.
No, it is. And look, I mean, you look at what comes out of the right wing, and I go, maybe we should be looking at Fox News. Maybe we should be looking at the people who reported on the story of Puerto Rican truck drivers on strike during the hurricane, holding the island hostage. That isn't even there's no justification for it whatsoever. Someone just reached
they were
around.
On strike.
What's that?
They said they were on strike.
Who was on strike?
They said the truck drivers were on strike.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And why do you think Trump's been going, what we need is those truck drivers. We need truck drivers to drive the trucks. We need the Puerto Rican drivers to come drive the truck. This has all come out of this right-wing fantasy that, they're all on strike. They want higher wages, and they're going to use the hurricane to do it. Look, I can point to thousands of fake news stories that come out of the right wing. What Trump is complaining about is people accurately reporting his words.
Yes.
And the Senate Intel Committee, Burr, caught me with something that when I was reading the story about it, he said the issue of collusion is still open.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I got to be honest. To come from a Republican, you go, "Wow, I'm shocked."
Yeah.
And look, I'm almost shocked out. That kind of shocked me.
And they probably won't wrap up by the end of 2017, but they want to crystallize their findings by the 2018 elections because, hey, the Russians are going to do it again.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Nice.
Exclamation mark.
Exactly. I mean, it's just, wow. Just absolutely crazy to me. Just crazy. Let's move on. The NSA, some warrantless surveillance. You mean they're watching us?
No, they don't watch us. They watch bad guys.
Oh, so we're not the bad guys.
Well, we might get inadvertently swept up.
Maybe.
In it.
But if you're not doing anything wrong, Victoria, you have nothing to worry about.
Nothing to worry about. Well, that's Section 702. And that may be ringing bells in your head now. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which of 2008, it has to be renewed every so often because everybody hates it so much and nobody trusts it enough to let it be permanent, except every president since 2008 wants it to be permanent, and so does the NSA, naturally. And what it does is allows them to get the information about foreigners, from the phone companies. But the problem is, and that's what the NSA does.
Right.
But the problem is, without a warrant, but it also scoops up inadvertent information about Americans those foreigners might have been speaking with.
Like Trump.
Without a warrant.
Like Trump.
Like Trump, like you.
Well, maybe, because if you remember, Trump was saying that Obama had him tapped, had my phones tapped.
Yes, that's right.
So could this have fallen under that maybe inadvertently got caught up in a couple of conversations with, I don't know, some Russian spies?
Possible.
See, again, it just makes you wonder where we're heading. And then the other part of this is, not just this. You look at the case in front of the Supreme Court. I think it's the Carpenter case that says, you know what, they might be able to use your cell phone to track you wherever you go.
This is a very disturbing case.
Yeah, I mean,
all these cell phone privacy cases are very disturbing. What's interesting is that the justices on the Supreme Court don't fall into conservative liberal slots on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where that plays out.
Yeah.
So there you go. In fact, the NSA was probably listening to this, and I hope they learned something.
They were.
Hope they learned something. Victoria, always great talking with you.
Good talking to you. Thank you.
Our good friend Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Take a quick break. When we come back, Andrea Chalupa is going to be here. Give us some updates on the possible collusion, the emails. Are we locking them up? Lots to get to. Quick break. Right back.
for and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
This is what unions do when people are in need, when our sisters and brothers are in need. We mobilize at the last second and make sure we're where we're needed, and we also maintain good relationships with management that we can utilize all of that for the greater good.
Association of Flight Attendants CWA spokesperson Taylor Garland speaking from San Juan, Puerto Rico about unions and United Airlines coming together for Puerto Rico. More than 300 union first responders, doctors, nurses, electricians, operating engineers, plumbers, iron workers, and utility workers flew into San Juan Wednesday to help with hurricane recovery. Puerto Rico residents evacuating due to the hurricane damage were on the return humanitarian flight. Garland says United Airlines CEO Oscar Munoz stepped up to join the unions in this humanitarian relief effort.
The flight attendants, pilots, and the machinists reached out to Oscar Munoz, CEO, and he answered the call and said, we're going to make this happen. And so we were in constant communication for a little less than last week, and we were able to get the flight off the ground.
October 5th is World Teachers Day. On a world level, unionized teachers are represented by Education International, which has 32 million members in 170 countries. EI's David Edwards tells Canada's Radio Labour that professional teachers in public education are under attack by a global market-driven reform movement. EI calls it the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM. He says here's what GERM is focused on.
Market-based reforms, market-oriented reforms. It has privatization. It heavily uses standardized tests as sort of the benchmark for what is quality. And it deprofessionalizes. It tends to, like I said before, it tends to play down the role of the teacher and tries to sort of script out and dictate what teachers should do.
Union teachers are often in the crosshairs of so-called reform movements with their professional status, salaries, benefits, and role in education all under pressure. And Edwards says conditions for teachers are deteriorating around the world as a result of this movement.
We've been seeing tendencies around flexibilization and casualization. We've been seeing continued pressure in terms of the outsourcing of teachers' work. So I would have to say it's probably been deteriorating over the past year in many places. For the most part, the global education reform movement, which tends to see teachers as just mere content deliverers, is still going forward.
WIN is America's multimedia voice for workers. Support WIN's news mission at workersindependentnews.com. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com. You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
Exposing GOP hypocrisy. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Lots going on, and I'm waiting for the chance. Where are the chants of lock her up? Lock her up! Yes, I'm not talking about Hillary. I'm talking about Ivanka. When we going to lock her up? When we locking up Jared? When we locking up all of the Trump folks who are using private email? I mean, didn't we just go through an entire 2016 election of people going, private email, bad? And yet here we've got, well, almost the entire administration. It's really bizarre and twisted. Also, the good news yesterday, as I said earlier in the hour, Richard Burr, the senator from North Carolina, the Republican senator, said there's a consensus among members and staff that we trust the conclusion of the ICA, which was, Russians had some dealings in our elections. He also said the issue of collusion is still open, and that, I got to tell you, grabbed me and made me think about how, it's still open. And here to talk about this and some other stuff, I've asked Andrea Chalupa to come talk with us. Andrea, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Still open. The idea, this is a Republican senator from North Carolina saying, well, the collusion thing still open.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's absolutely obvious to anybody that's been paying any attention. That would be a huge travesty of justice if they said that case was closed. I mean, we know just from publicly available information that there was collusion going on, just based alone on the fact that Don Jr. took a meeting to get dirt on Hillary Clinton, and this was from a Russian lawyer who works closely to lobby for the Kremlin's interests in the United States, as well as a former security agent for Russia, who as well as a very staunch lobbyist for Putin's government's interests. And these two individuals, sat in the Trump Tower with Don Jr., Manafort, Kushner, and promised them, this is what we have on Hillary Clinton, and just know that the Russian government is behind you. Like, that is a firm handshake deal to work together to get Trump elected, because he would be much friendlier for Putin's interests.
And, there's part of me that goes, how is it that you don't put those pieces together? I've had conversations recently with a number of people who just believe none of it. It's all made up. It's all you leftists and all of you people who are just making this stuff because you want to tear Donald down. I'm going, did you not see Flynn? Did you not see Manafort? Are you not paying attention to this? And they go, well, they're guilty, but Trump's not.
I mean, Trump himself is a walking, talking Kremlin propaganda operation. His talking points throughout the campaign and even what he blasts out on his crazy Twitter feed echo a lot of the talking points you see coming out of Kremlin propaganda networks. So this is just blatant coordination going on right before our very eyes. From the intelligence report that Obama ordered right before he left office, one of the findings included that the Kremlin just wanted to sow chaos. And there's no greater chaos agent than Trump himself.
That is true. And interestingly enough, you had the Republican Senator Bob Corker saying just that. Saying that you have Kelly and Mattis and Tillerson, they're good people doing good work for our foreign policy, and then you've got the agent of chaos.
Exactly. I mean, Republicans are getting tired of it. If you follow the Trump Regrets Twitter account, you see Republicans screaming at Trump's Twitter account saying, "I voted for you, damn it! Like, stop, get off Twitter, like, act presidential." It's really, really sad and pathetic to see, so many Republicans, including moderates, like Joe Scarborough, when he was Republican at the time, expecting this other Trump to emerge. But the reality is that there was no other Trump. What you see is what you get with him.
Yeah, I keep getting that too. He was a Democrat, don't you know, Andrea? He was a Democrat.
Sure, maybe. I mean, but the reality is that what we found out during the campaign, as a New Yorker, somebody that's been living in New York City for 11 or so years, Trump was seen as sort of just another goofy mascot of this, crazy dynamic city. No one really sort of took him seriously. And of course, there were, stories of his Russian mafia connections, what a cheap person he was. Graydon Carter's Spy magazine was dedicated to basically exposing and making fun of Trump. No one really took him seriously, but no one really understood what an evil human being he was until the horrible, horrible stories that came out, especially at the very end of the election, about his, bragging about sexual assault. And then you've just seen his absolute, Antichrist level callousness and sort of how he's treated the Americans stranded in Puerto Rico by the U.S. government. How he's treated DACA, the dreamers that Obama tried so hard to protect, and how he's treated, Muslim Americans, and it gone against, one of the foundations of our democracy, which is freedom of religion. Like this person, this Trump person, he's just an abysmal scar on America's history now, along with slavery, along with so many other dark periods of our nation's history.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to look any further than Tuesday when he was in Puerto Rico, where you just go, really? We're going to throw paper towels at people like their T-shirts at a ball game?
Yeah, that was total humiliation for the United States, and of course, President Putin was loving that. Like, that's what he wants, is to humiliate the United States and bring us to our knees and show that you're not such a great power, you're not morally superior to us, as Putin might phrase it. Look at the sort of person that you've elected and what a clown he is. So that's another benefit to Putin's interest, having Trump in office.
Yeah, I mean, he was talking to this couple, and they were explaining how difficult things are and how they've lost everything, and he goes, "Don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you. Have a good time. Have a good time." And I'm going, "What?"
I mean, Trump might be qualified to be a greeter at Chuck E. Cheese, but most certainly,
I don't want him near my kids.
I'm so sorry. I totally take that back then.
I've gone to Chuck E. Cheese a handful of times. I don't want him there.
I take that back. Yeah, no, I mean, he seems like somebody who's more at ease, making sure the drinks are filled in some Russian mafia gambling den, like the one that was housed in the Trump Tower that the feds broke up. He seems much more at home in sort of like a lounge act sort of setting. And to that end, his daughter Ivanka, she's just a prettier packaged version of her, of her father. She's just as unethical in her business dealings as he is in some respects. There was this bombshell report that just came out on how Trump's the family lawyer, bribed Cy Vance here in New York City to, when he was in office, to drop a case against Ivanka Trump and Don Jr. into how they had misled investors into a Trump property. And that case disappeared for a mere couple tens of thousands of dollars. And so if only, Cy Vance had some backbone and wasn't tempted by greed, and he had some, strong moral character, he could have really, taken on Don Jr. and Ivanka and really exposed them in the press, brought them to justice in their greedy business practices. And we could have had a very different presidential election. So that was really heartbreaking to see, that miscarriage of justice.
It's amazing to me. I mean, how cheap, honestly, how cheaply you can buy somebody. I mean,
absolutely.
You're saying a couple of tens of thousands of dollars maybe in donations. I mean, I look at all of these senators who have taken maybe $30,000-$40,000 from the NRA, and there's just no way in hell they're ever going to vote for any sane gun restrictions. I mean, you look at how cheap it is to buy some of these people into your ideological camp. It's kind of frightening.
Any soul that can be bought is automatically a cheap soul to begin with. So that's one way of looking at it. The other, and just in terms of the NRA, is they have that 5 million strong NRA membership, and that sort of grassroots organization, that tribal organization. Elected officials on the Republican side are scared of that, and so they're they really sort of are kept in line by that 10 million strong organization. So if that's the case, then we on our side need to then organize and make a 6 million, 7 million strong organization, coalition, whatever it need be, and just make even more noise and be even more aggressive and show up on their doorsteps and let them know that we're in their faces, holding them accountable to human rights in this country. Because what we have now with the NRA is a gun lobby. It's a terrorist organization that's ruled by greed and keeping their own card-carrying members in fear that any form of sensible gun control is something that's going to infringe on their Second Amendment, which couldn't be further from the truth. So if it's really this lobbying effort by this member-based organization that's keeping Republicans in check, which is something I've seen here covered in the press, then we just have to be stronger and louder than NRA members and more terrifying.
Yeah, well, but they've got guns, Andrea.
Yes, but we've got people power.
They've got arsenals. I mean, and the thing is, this shooter in Las Vegas, highlighted to me, and I know people like this guy, they literally have arsenals in their basement with, 50, 100 guns, thousands of rounds of ammunition because they think, somebody's coming for them.
Absolutely. I mean, I have friends in the NRA. I actually have a tradition in my family where we go to the shooting range the day after Thanksgiving, and we love the shooting range. We have a lot of fun doing that as a family. But all of us as a family, we're for sensible gun legislation that is long overdue. That should have been put in place long before even Sandy Hook. Because what we have going on in this country is an absolute insanity, and the world is watching, and that's on us.
Yeah.
That's not on anyone but us. And it's our children are in danger. Our families, when you go into a movie theater, when you go out to a restaurant, like who knows what's waiting for you because of the guns getting into the wrong hands. And it's just it is something that we just have to be louder. We have to be louder, and we have to organize, and we have to have no fear in taking on the NRA, because what's the worst they could do? They come after us with their guns. They start shooting at us. That just proves our point even more.
Yeah, but Sandy Hook didn't happen, and Las Vegas was a false flag.
Well, the crazies out there that listen to Alex Jones and other right-wing media, like they're a very loud minority, and we just have to step across them and just keep going, keep pushing. And the facts are very powerful. The truth is very powerful, and there's no killing the truth. The truth always survives. You see that when you study history. Just see that people get caught eventually. The truth comes out eventually, and we just keep pushing and keep fighting on.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing, and maybe it's just because I'm old. I'm 50, but I seem to remember a time where the Alex Jones types, we looked at out of the corner of our eyes, just as you go back into your hole, put your tinfoil hat on, and we ignored them. They were ignored, and now they seem to be driving the message. And I keep coming back to the Russian involvement in the election and all of the fake news. And we used to have filters to be able to go, well, that's just plain ridiculous. It seems like we've lost that filter.
Yeah, I don't know. Social media has helped with that, and of course now we're finding out that the Russians, helped Jared Kushner's digital operation by pumping out targeted fake news to Facebook users and Twitter users leading up to the election. It's a brave new world, most definitely, and it's never been more important to fight that by investing in quality journalism, by rebuilding local newspapers, by supporting local journalism. If you think about Watergate, that was a local news issue. That was the Metro desk that exposed the president. It's essential to really support the free media that's basically protecting us from a lot of Trump's worst authoritarian instincts. There's a wonderful deep dive into how two Politico reporters spent over 1,000 hours investigating Tom Price's habit of taking private jets. This was some serious shoe leather that these reporters wore down, trying to track down his flight travel, which he kept hidden. His meeting agenda, which he for a very long time kept hidden. And so it just shows you that you just need old-fashioned muckraker journalism to really be strongly supported and expanded on in order to combat this horrible fake news epidemic.
There was a reason that the founders thought the press was so important.
Extremely so.
Yeah, it's just amazing stuff. Andrea, I appreciate you taking some time for us. I look forward to having you back again next week as we continue down this path.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Great stuff. Always great talking with you. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was a day known in Hollywood as Black Friday. After World War II, the movie industry began to rake in profits. But they did not pass those profits along to their employees. 10,000 members of the Conference of Studio Unions were on strike. They were part of the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners. They were also in a jurisdictional battle with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, over who should represent stage decorators. The strike wore on for half a year. The studios had more than 100 films backlogged and were able to wait out the strikers. But as the strike continued and the studios remained silent, pressure mounted. Despite the tensions between the two unions, thousands of IATSE members refused to cross the picket lines. On Black Friday, the strikers decided to concentrate their efforts at the Warner Brothers Studios gate. 300 picketers gathered to hold the line. Scabs, hired by Warner Brothers, tried to drive through the workers' picket lines to the studio. Variety accounted what happened next, writing, quote, "Strikers deployed from their barricades, halted non-strikers, and rolled 3 automobiles on their sides. By noon, reinforcements arrived from both sides. Firemen were called in to turn their hoses on the striking workers. Warner Brothers security deployed tear gas. Common for the time, accusations were hurled that the Conference of Studio Union strikers were communists. As a result of the strike, the Conference of Studio Union's employees were assigned to other jobs in the studios. When they refused, they were locked out. The union never recovered. The violence at the Warner Brothers Studios gate also helped to fuel the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act through Congress, which eroded union protections. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So outside of the massacre in Las Vegas being a false flag operation, which, look, you know, the day it happened, I said, well, you know, get ready for it. The kooks are going to come out and say it did happen, or it was a false flag, or it was, you know, it was the government. They did it. And look, do I think Trump did it? No. There's no way Trump was involved because he would want to take credit for it. It was the greatest massacre ever. It was the best massacre ever. We had the most injuries ever. It was fabulous. He didn't do that. But I do find it interesting that the right wing has taken the positions that they have. Double down on the fact that we can't have a reasonable conversation around, you know, guns in our society. I got to protect my home. Yeah, I need a nuclear arsenal. I want to protect my home. I mean, it's just crazy. But no more crazy than what we saw happen in Congress this week. It's mind-blowing to me that, you know, this week what you saw was the Republicans on a party line vote, Tuesday night vote on what they called the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. Had to get all of that emotion in there. They're really great at naming stuff, which according to CNN would criminalize any abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy, except in instances of life of the mother and rape or incest. Which, I got to be honest, I already thought was the law anyway. But instead of going, hey, guns killed people, we're going the other way. Never mind the guns. Never mind the guns. We don't care about what happens to you after you're born. We're going on this ideological rant to understand. This is purely, it's probably not going to pass the Senate. But this is about raising money. Because what we're seeing coming out of Republican donors is they're ticked. They're ticked that they didn't get their repeal and replace tax cut. Because really all they wanted is they wanted their tax cut. That had nothing to do with health care, don't care. They want their tax reform. They want more tax cuts. They want to do away with Medicare and Medicaid. They want their tax cuts. And until they get that, I mean, we're seeing just reports all across the Republican donor spectrum saying, you know what, we're not investing any more money in because you're not getting anything done. Now, the amazing thing to me is, and I can't tell you, I've had tons of these conversations with gun nuts over the years. Which, just the low-level thinking on this issue is quite frightening. Because I have people go, well, you want gun control. I'm going, no, we already have gun control. I'm talking about where we put the line. We already have a measure of arms control. We do. If you have the right to bear arms, I should have the right to, a cruise missile. I should have the right to a nuclear weapon. I should have the right to a stealth bomber. I should have the right to, cannons and grenade launchers and bazookas and whatever. I should have a right to all of that stuff because I have a right to bear arms. So we already have gun control. We have it. It's just, where do we move that line? Where is the line? Are we okay with having, everyone having a handgun, walking around with a handgun because I got to protect myself? And then they get mad at somebody who cuts them off in traffic and, shoots them a couple of times. Is that what we want? And I'm so sick of this idiotic, Rick, guns don't kill people. People do. Yes, but the gun helps. The gun helps. When I was a kid, I used to point my finger at people and go, bang, bang. Nobody ever died. If I had a gun, which some kids do, which oddly enough, I was looking at this statistic the other day that said on average 21 people die every year because a toddler shoots and kills someone. And you go, exactly how does a toddler get a gun? I know, negligent parents. And why do we not lock those people? Oh, it's a horrible tragedy. No, lock those people up. We have just lost our freaking mind on the gun issue. It's just nuts to me. Let your kid go to the park at 8 years old and you get arrested. He shoots the neighbor kid. It was an accident. Horrible, terrible tragedy. Have we lost our freaking minds? Honestly, truthfully. The Republicans vote on a party line vote on abortion after someone gets, after 58 people are gunned down and hundreds others injured by a madman with a gun. Or not just a gun, an arsenal. And then you've got people saying, well, maybe he wasn't the shooter after all. Maybe he's dead, but maybe he didn't do the actual shooting. And I bring that home here to Pennsylvania, where Representative Tim Murphy, who now evidently is resigning after his abortion vote, because, well, golly gee, his mistress may have been pregnant and he begged her to get an abortion. What? Oh, my goodness. Oh, it's mind-blowing madness. And I keep asking, when do we come back to our senses? Look, I'm not an anti-gun guy. I get it on a certain level. But to be honest, where we are now, just kind of crazy. Kind of crazy. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the gun issue with Chelsea Parsons from the Center for American Progress. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
Begging anyone that can hear us to save us from dying.
Humanitarian crisis remains dire in Puerto Rico.
Scale up. They need to scale up in Puerto Rico. Katrina had 20,000 federal troops. And Puerto Rico is bigger than Katrina.
U.S. military begins to step up its disaster response. Trump attacks San Juan mayor on Twitter from his golf club in New Jersey. Plus, General Motors announces it will start making more electric cars.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I have no reaction. The mayor's living on a cot, and I hope the president have a good day at golf.
That sounds like a reaction to me, General Honoré, man who saved New Orleans after Katrina. This is your Green News Report.
I'm
Okay, Desi Doyen, with the horrible events in Las Vegas, I'm concerned that Puerto Rico may fall off the radar of the corporate media right now. How are things going down there?
Well, they are improving somewhat in the wake of the destruction wrought by Hurricane Maria. The situation remains dire for hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens, with distribution of aid remaining the biggest problem for the island. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to give remarks in Puerto Rico later today. Journalists who have managed to reach the island's remote interior villages report that residents say they still have not seen any government relief operations nearly 2 weeks after the hurricane destroyed the island's infrastructure and communications. The Department of Defense has now revised upwards the number of Puerto Ricans lacking access to clean water. It's about 54%, a little over 1.6 million people. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is now in Puerto Rico to begin restoring the electric grid transmission lines. On Friday, the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, gave another impassioned plea for the federal government to escalate its response and cut through bureaucratic red tape.
So I am done being polite. I am done being politically correct. I am mad as hell because my people's lives are at stake.
That received an unprecedented response from U.S. President Donald Trump. Tweeting from his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey over the weekend, Trump attacked the mayor and the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico as, quote, ingrates who, quote, expect everything to be done for them.
And just to be clear, Mayor Cruz has been spending the last 2 weeks wading through hip-deep water with waders on, trying to reach her constituent, trying to save lives with a bullhorn. You heard General Honoré there, who was the general who came in after Katrina to clean up that mess, criticizing these obnoxious tweets from Donald Trump. I don't even know what to say at this point anymore.
Well, the U.S. military commander who has been appointed to lead this emergency response, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, is now in Puerto Rico. In an interview with CNBC, he agreed with Mayor Cruz's dire assessment after seeing the destruction for himself, saying he will need more troops and more equipment.
Do you think that we've turned a corner now on logistics, that this is the tip of the iceberg?
I'd be hesitant to say that. Our capacity is growing, but that doesn't mean that we're getting all the right help to the people who need it.
So I guess Lieutenant Jeffrey Buchanan, by Donald Trump's definition, hates the troops and the first responders as well.
Private companies have also stepped up to help. Tesla, which owns solar panel and battery storage maker Solar City, has sent hundreds of solar panels, home-sized battery storage systems, and installation teams to help restore electricity, repair damaged solar panel systems, and install new ones. German company Sonnen says it will also be installing local microgrids in Puerto Rico to help restore emergency operations around the island. Hurricane Maria exposed the vulnerability of centralized electric grids with overhead transmission lines, and that has spurred talk of rebuilding the island's electric grid to accommodate more renewable energy in a decentralized system, including community microgrids. Tom Rogers, a renewable energy expert in Britain, told the Washington Post that utility executives on several battered Caribbean islands that he has spoken to told him, quote, they would prefer to rebuild using distributed generation with storage, just trying to reduce the amount of transmission lines. Finally, some surprising news. On Monday, American car maker General Motors became the latest auto manufacturer to announce that it is making a push into electric cars, with at least 20 all-electric models by 2023. Auto industry analysts say the move was forced in part by China, which recently announced it will set a timetable for the complete phase-out of the sale of conventional gasoline and diesel cars within its borders. China intends to be the world leader in electric vehicle sales and manufacturing, and GM needs to keep up.
Well, it takes a while, but American auto companies are maybe figuring it out. You figured it out, Desi Doyen, long ago. Thank you for that. For much more on all our stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Hang on, help is on its way. I'll be there as fast as I can. Hang on, a tiny voice did say, from somewhere deep inside the inner man.
Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So Nancy sent me an email during the break saying the GOP uses tragedy better than anyone else. And in this case, they're using it to take rights away from women. Not surprising. Arnold points out that such blank hypocrite, talking about Tim Murphy, some mother on welfare is going to have her baby, and his girlfriend not so much. Honestly, that's the crux of it. And look, you go back to never let a good tragedy go to waste. This was, in my view, it's not about passing any more abortion legislation. They don't want to really do that. They want the money. They want people all riled up and sending them money. But I got to be honest, this most recent gun tragedy, and I'm tired of that. I'm tired of the tragedy. This massacre brought on a whole bunch of people saying, oh, our condolences, our warmest, sincerest apologies, or whatever. Nonsense. It's time for action. That's why I've asked Chelsea Parsons to come talk with us. She's the Vice President of Guns and Crime Policy there at the Center for American Progress. Chelsea, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, anytime.
So am I the only one who's tired of the soft rhetoric and the political statements? I'm tired of it already. It's time to do something.
Absolutely, and you are certainly not the only one. And in fact, we are seeing a kind of outpouring of that exact sentiment from many, many of our Democrat elected officials. Chris Murphy, I think, said it most directly a few hours after what the news broke about Las Vegas, calling on Congress to get off its ass. And I think, that's exactly what we need at this point, because this keeps happening, and yet, we don't get much more than thoughts and prayers, and then, don't politicize what just happened.
But here's the thing. I mean, we keep hearing people say, Chelsea, you're politicizing this. We can't politicize this tragedy. Now is not the time.
I think that that's absurd, to be honest. I think that, if now is not the time, I think them saying now is not the time means it's never the time. We have 90 people killed with guns in this country every day. So if it's not the time after a gun death, there will never be a time, because this happens constantly in this country. And
because it happens constantly, we're kind of desensitized to the daily news. Because look, you watch any evening news across this country, there's blood and gore all over the place. We only seem to want to talk about this stuff after a massacre, after some nut with as we're now finding out, an automatic weapons taking pot shots into a crowd of concert goers.
Yeah, I think what happens is that it's too easy for many of us to simply discount the kind of gun violence that plagues a lot of our communities every day, simply by saying, well, that's not me, right? And I think that what happens after something like what happened in Las Vegas is that all of us can identify with having been at a concert, right? All of us can identify with having been at a movie theater or having kids in elementary school. And so I think what happens after really horrific acts of mass violence like this is that it forces people to actually put themselves in the place of the people who were targeted. And that's why, a lot of people really do have a very emotional reaction when something like this happens, because it could have been any of us who were at a concert just enjoying ourselves on a Sunday evening.
Have they officially labeled this guy a terrorist yet? I mean, look, I know there was some talk, maybe, to me, look, he's definitely terrorized this country, and not just Las Vegas, because, I've got friends who are like, I got to worry about going to a concert too. This one guy has terrorized this entire country, and yet, last I checked, he wasn't officially labeled a terrorist.
I think that's right. I don't know that I've seen, any kind of official labeling of him as a terrorist. But that's absolutely right. And certainly, for someone to go to all of the trouble of the planning that was involved here, the lengths of the planning, certainly this was something done for the purpose of terrorizing the American people. And so, I think we should call it what it is.
Now, here's the thing that bothers me. One guy with a shoe, something in his shoe, and now every time I get on a plane, we got to take our shoes and our belts, and eventually it's going to be complete total strip searches. What's it going to be now going into a hotel? Are we going to be going through metal detectors and and having our bags searched before we can check into a hotel because this gun nut, because he has the right. It's his right to own a gun, Chelsea. Because
Yeah, sorry. So, I think that's right. I think that, there's always this instinct to try to find something else other than the gun to focus on by many on the right. And so, here, we can't focus on mental health because he doesn't seem to have any kind of history of that. We can't focus on, international terrorism because that doesn't seem to be implicated here. And so, okay, we'll focus on hotel security rather than looking at the horrendously weak laws that we have in this country that allowed somebody to amass an arsenal that was able to use a legal accessory to make a semi-automatic gun function as a fully automatic gun. Those are the things that we should be talking about, not putting up more security measures in hotels.
Yeah, at a time when Congress was considering making silencers legal.
That's absolutely right. And that was something that was happening under the radar. That was a piece of legislation that was slipped into a bill designed to focus on conservation and public lands issues. It was put through the wrong committee in the House that didn't actually have jurisdiction over it and was poised to come to the floor. So that's what this Congress is doing, doing the work and the bidding of the NRA while people are focused on, every other thing that's going on.
Yeah, I had one of the comments that came from one of my gun nut friends here recently. And I want to get your reaction to it because it's one of these things that it just kind of stopped me in my tracks. That these massacres, these shootings, all of these gun deaths, it's I love the bumper sticker mentality. It's the burden of freedom.
I almost don't actually even have words to respond to that. That is so chilling to me that, we would be willing to accept this kind of horrific violence and that we're willing to accept, 33,000 people killed with guns every year as the price of freedom. I think we are much smarter as a nation. We like to think that we are, that we should be able to come up with ways of addressing this problem as opposed to just saying, well, that's the price of freedom and that's the cost of living in a free society. I think that's absurd.
I mean, it is crazy, but we have this frame that the Second Amendment sacrosanct. We can have no restrictions on my right to bear arms. And I've been saying, especially to my gun nut friends, that look, we already have arms control. We have gun control laws. It's not a matter of that ship's already sailed. We've decided we're going to have gun control laws. It's just a matter of where the line is. Look, I don't want somebody to be able to legally get a semi-automatic weapon and then the accessory to make it a fully automatic weapon and say, well, both are legal, but you can't put them together. It just seems really stupid.
Well, and Justice Scalia has already answered that question. Justice Scalia himself said the Second Amendment right is not an unlimited right. And he said in the Heller decision, it is not a right to carry whatever gun you want, in whatever manner you want, in whatever place that you want. But it is subject to reasonable restriction. So we have already had that conversation. The Supreme Court has already answered that question. The Second Amendment is not a barrier to enacting restrictive laws that help keep guns out of the wrong hands and that help limit access to incredibly dangerous weapons that are really military-purposed weapons.
So let me ask you the other side of this, because, as it's been pointed out to me a number of times, these mass shootings are a small number of the gun deaths. It gets all of the headlines, but a very small number. The real problem in our country is the proliferation, if I can say that right, proliferation of handguns. That handguns actually kill many more people than these assault-style weapons. I'm curious your thought.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Handguns are responsible for the majority of gun deaths, and we're talking not just about homicides and interpersonal disputes that end up becoming fatal because of access to a gun, which is a large part of it. But we're also talking about gun-related suicides, which are a huge part of our gun violence problem in this country. They account for 2/3 of the gun deaths and often involve the use of a handgun. So that's absolutely right. And while certainly we need to look at what happened in Las Vegas and figure out what are ways to prevent that from happening again, and looking at how assault weapons and high-capacity magazines enable somebody bent on doing violence to be able to have a really significant and deadly impact. But we need to also look at laws around handguns and how we can prevent people who are prohibited from having any kind of weapon from being able to get their hands on them. And so that's things like, that's why we always talk about universal background checks. That's why we talk about things like gun trafficking and making sure that we have laws in place that can prevent guns from moving from states that have weak laws into states that have strong laws. We have a patchwork of laws in this country, and the states that have failed to step up and strengthen their laws undermine the work that other states like Illinois, like California, have done to strengthen their laws. They're still vulnerable to the fact that other states haven't done the same.
You know, I look at this, and again, what's frustrating is the Republicans, they came up with their bill. We're going to go after abortions. Why haven't the Democrats? Why hasn't there been a comprehensive plan put forth? Look, now we're talking about the gun issue. Why is there not something to say this is what we should be doing? Why haven't we seen that?
So we have. I mean, the Democrats there are a number of bills that have been introduced. Chris Murphy has a background checks bill. There are bills that are designed to close a number of the different gaps in our law. I think that, we saw after what happened at Pulse in Orlando last summer, where Chris Murphy did his 13-hour filibuster, just demanding a vote. Not, all he wanted was bring something to the floor, and we had a vote on it, and it didn't pass. And so I think the Democrats have a number of bills that are really well crafted and would address a lot of these problems. I think that in this particular moment and in this Congress, the more urgent need is to prevent the NRA from pushing forward its dangerous agenda, which is things like deregulating silencers and enacting a concealed carry reciprocity bill. Those are the things we know they've been trying to get through this Congress. And at a minimum, in this moment, we need to put the brakes on that to make sure that we don't further weaken our laws that already have a number of holes in them.
Really quick, for those who may not have heard Murphy's filibuster or have seen these bills, what would help curtail gun deaths in this country? What would help move us in a direction that you would think would be positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is background checks. So right now, only licensed gun dealers have to conduct background checks under federal law, but I can sell you a gun in a parking lot, and I don't even need to ask your name. So that's a big one that we need to fix. I think that there are some gaps in the law with respect to domestic abusers continuing to be able to have access to guns. We need to shut that down. There's also, I mentioned gun trafficking. There's currently no federal law that actually criminalizes the act of trafficking guns across state lines. And so there's a bill that's been introduced to fix that as well. Those are just three quick things that would really have a big impact on reducing the number of gun deaths in this country.
What about the idea of, and this came up with a friend of mine, and I'm not really sure where I'm still chewing it around a little bit, but the idea that you have people who, and I know a couple of people who have, they've got like 60, 70, 100 guns, tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition. I mean, they've got their own little private arsenal. At some point, do we not have to track these folks, or would that be unconstitutional?
So it wouldn't be unconstitutional. It would violate current federal law. There's actually in the federal law in a couple of different places a strict prohibition on the federal government keeping any kind of list or registry of gun owners, and that comes from the NRA stoked fear of, well, if you start having a list of gun owners, then that facilitates the ability of the federal government to come and confiscate all of the guns. And so it actually right now is impossible for ATF or any other federal agency to keep track of who has what guns. And I think that's something that we should definitely talk about, because again, you have somebody like the shooter in this case and others who do amass an arsenal, and it begs the question of why does somebody need that many guns, for their personal civilian use.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been one of those things, and I've got friends who are, I think they love their guns more than they love their spouses. And it's almost on this fetish level that, to me, honestly, seems like would rise to a mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to disparage people who want to have firearms and all of that, but I do think
No,
that
I'm not disparaging people who have firearms. Look, you've got a guy who got a shotgun for home protection. I like taking the pistol to the gun range. Great. I'm talking about the guys who've got 100 AR-15s and stockpiles. Their basements full of arms.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There was some new research done via a survey to try to assess kind of what does the gun stock and the private ownership of guns look like in this country. And one of the things that the researchers found is that the total number of households in the United States that are choosing to own guns has actually gone down. But the households that do own guns are owning an increasing number of them. So you're seeing this concentration of guns being owned by a smaller number of individuals, which does kind of get at this stockpiling, if you will. And part of that, I think, does come from the NRA and the gun lobby's messaging of, always you need more guns, you need this kind of gun, you need to, add this to your collection. And I think, it's worth remembering who the gun lobby works for, right? And there is a very strong and powerful industry behind all of this that is just looking to maintain their profits. And without the threat of President Obama taking their guns, they have to figure out another way to get people to keep funding that industry.
So last question I've got for you is on that line, because President Obama was the greatest salesperson for the gun industry, because look, everyone, the black guy in the White House is going to come take your gun. I look at this as every time one of these crises, every time one of these massacres, tragedies, whatever you're going to call them, every time it happens, the gun stocks go up. Companies are fat and happy because they know people are going to rush out and buy guns.
Yeah, it's a pretty perverse situation that happens, and I was reading this morning that now that this bump stock accessory has been in the news. Those are all selling out now. People are running out to buy those. So it's an interesting dynamic, I guess I would say.
It is what it is. Chelsea, I appreciate you taking some time for us, sharing your expertise. Thanks so much.
Anytime.
Great talking with you, Chelsea Parsons, Vice President of Guns and Crime Policy there at the Center for American Progress. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Got richer, laid their future plans. They saw that food was everything to man. And maybe then they had a thought, help the poorest folks, but it only brought more money to their hands. And the poor keep getting poorer, people turn away, not able to admit the way they planned. It's taking all the soul away from everything they grew. They can't have no legs on which to stand.
Uncovering the con and conservatism. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That was the day Henry George accepted the nomination to run for mayor of New York on the United Labor Party ticket. In cities across the country, trade unionists met to found state labor parties and to hammer out political platforms for local and state elections. In New York City, ULP advocates issued the Clarendon Hall platform and nominated Henry George as the ULP candidate for the mayoral race. George had gained prominence with the 1879 publishing of his book, Progress and Poverty. In it, he addressed private land ownership as the basis for inequality and advocated for a single tax system. At New York's Cooper Union that evening, where thousands of supporters gathered, George addressed the crowd. He presented the ULP platform of higher wages, shorter hours, better working conditions, government ownership of railroads and communications, and the end to police repression. Burroughs and Wallace described the scene that night in their book, Gotham, A History of New York City to 1898. During his speech, George declared, quote, "This government of New York City, our whole political system is rotten to the core." He argued that politicians had made a trade out of assembling votes and selling them to powerful interests. What business got in return was police protection, lax enforcement of housing and health codes, friendly judges, and fat franchises. To purify the political order, working-class voters had to sever ties to all the established parties and choose from their own ranks. For a party that had just been founded weeks before, George came in second. But like its sister organization in Chicago, the New York ULP would split over issues of socialism within a year. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. You know, on the gun issue, and I can't tell you, every time one of these massacres happen, every time one of these tragedies pop up, it becomes the topic of conversation with a lot of the folks that I know. And the weird thing is it comes back into two camps. And, there's the camp of we can't have any type of control whatsoever because it's a slippery slope and the government's going to come and take your guns away. And we're going to end up, like some repressed people in other nations. And then there's the other side who says we can't have any guns at all because guns are going to kill people. And I understand both sides of it, which is why I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. In this idea that, look, I get the founding principle. I've read the Federalist Papers. I've read the Constitution. I've read some of the writings on why the thought process was there. And to me, the Second Amendment has always been very clear. You have the right to bear arms in a well-regulated militia. Because the founders didn't want to have a standing army because they knew we would have to use our standing army. And we would have intervention all around the world. They got that. But they also didn't want to be invaded. So everyone was supposed to be in the militia. So everyone would have a gun. In that frame, thinking about it in that period, in that era, makes perfect sense. In fact, there was actually legislation that George Washington signed that mandated that every able-bodied male between the ages of, I think it was like 16 and 50 or whatever it was, had to own a gun, had to own a pack, had a whole laundry list of military-type items to be on hand at a moment's notice. So that if you were called up, you grabbed your pack and you went to defend the country. That made sense. We now, however, live in an era that the founders could have never fathomed. The technological advancements, there's just no way that the founders could have imagined a weapon that can shoot out 60, 100 bullets in seconds. Never could have thought of that. Never could have thought that there would be, massive missiles and nuclear weapons. So the idea of the right to bear arms now has a modern kind of thought. And as Chelsea pointed out, even someone as conservative as Scalia said, look, there's got to be some rational thought in this. And this is where I keep hoping that this conversation will go, somewhere in a rational thought place. How do we make sure that gun nuts like the guy who did this shooting don't do it in the future? How do we make sure that, or attempt to alleviate it happening in the future? Look, you're never going to regulate crazy because they're right. Someone could just drive a truck into things. We're going to outlaw trucks. Well, people who are down that path may be. I just look at this, and the conversation has to be had, and we're not doing it yet. We're still yelling at each other. We're still screaming past each other with platitudes and talking points. It's kind of crazy to me. And the hope is that, out of all of this, the suffering will be remembered, and those folks will find peace. It's just, as I tweeted out right away, the rights of one guy cost, 50-some people their lives, 58 people their lives. Something wrong. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. See you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.